There comes a pivotal moment in every parent's life when their relationship with their children undergoes significant changes. After years of nurturing, support, and selfless sacrifices dedicated to their well-being, the realization dawns that the dynamics have shifted. Perhaps advice no longer resonates, opinions are dismissed, communication takes on a dismissive tone, or, even more painfully, a sense of one's own irrelevance emerges. Such developments can evoke deep disappointment and even anger. The natural desire is to remind children of the efforts invested and the years when their interests were prioritized above all else. However, it's crucial to understand that anger is not a constructive solution and often only exacerbates the situation. There is a much more effective approach to restoring respect without conflicts, arguments, and mutual resentment. The following are 6 effective strategies that can be implemented when children exhibit disrespect. These changes involve adjusting one's own reactions and can drastically alter how parents are perceived in the eyes of their children. Some of these strategies may seem unexpected, but by reading through them to the end, you can learn how to regain your role as a respected and significant figure in your children's lives. The first step towards harmonious relationships with grown children lies in relinquishing the obsessive desire for their approval. A common mistake, especially among older parents, is an excessive desire to please their offspring. This often manifests as a willingness to sacrifice their own interests, saying yes in situations where they should say no, and prioritizing their children's needs above their own, in the naive hope of earning their appreciation. However, as practice shows, such tactics lead to the opposite effect. The more a parent seeks approval, the less respect they receive in return. Respect is not the result of self-sacrifice, but a consequence of self-respect. By constantly yielding, avoiding conflicts, and putting others' interests above their own, a parent inadvertently accustoms their children to the idea that their feelings are secondary. Once this thought takes root in their minds, they begin to take it for granted. An example of this is the story of Margaret, an energetic and independent woman who, over the years, allowed her children to completely control her life. She adjusted her schedule to their needs, suppressed her own opinions, and tolerated their dismissive attitude towards her. "I just want to keep the family together," she shared. But in the end, her children stopped valuing her, seeing her only as someone willing to make any concessions and sacrifices. In striving for peace in the family, Margaret lost her own voice and the respect of her loved ones. When children demonstrate disrespect towards their parents, the primary task is not to insistently demand respect, but to stop demonstrating the need for it. It is important to set clear boundaries, learn to say a firm no in situations where it is necessary, and confidently express your own opinion, even if it is not met with approval from your children. The moment parents begin to show self-respect, children begin to perceive them in a different light, which over time leads to the restoration of respectful relations. Instead of fruitless arguments, focus on being a role model. When children ignore their parents' opinions, interrupt them, or show disrespect, the natural reaction may be to engage in an argument, remind them of past merits, and demand obedience. However, experience shows that arguments rarely lead to the desired result. Respect does not arise from verbal altercations. It is a consequence of confident behavior, the ability to remain composed, and an adequate response to provocations. By responding to disrespect with anger, parents only reinforce the children's belief that they have power over them. History knows many cases where people who enjoyed unquestionable authority in one area of life found themselves in the shadows in another. Consider Frank, a retired teacher who confidently led students for decades, but faced devaluation from his grown children within the walls of his own home. His advice went unheeded, his concerns were dismissed, and attempts to put them on the right path sometimes evoked only mockery. At first, Frank tried to defend his significance, proving that he still deserved respect. However, the more effort he put in, the more the situation worsened. And then one day, a dramatic change occurred in his behavior. Instead of engaging in fruitless arguments, he began to listen sincerely. He stopped seeking recognition through words and began to demonstrate the behavior of someone who already possessed it. His speech was calm and wise, devoid of the desire to win an argument. And gradually, Frank's children began to notice these changes. They saw before them a person who doesn't need their approval, who has nothing to prove, but is simply the embodiment of strength and confidence. If children are disrespectful, you shouldn't engage in a battle for recognition with them. It's much more effective to show by your own example what respect is, demonstrating it first and foremost towards yourself. By maintaining dignity, speaking with confidence, and in no case stooping to the level of unworthy behavior, you can achieve much more. After all, when a person behaves with dignity, those around them feel it, and over time they begin to imitate such behavior, adopting it as a role model. The third step on the path to maturity is liberation from emotional dependence. One of the most difficult lessons that life teaches is the realization that you shouldn't seek a source of emotional satisfaction in children. Love for them can be limitless, and it's natural to desire reciprocity and respect. However, as soon as children feel that they are expected to provide a sense of self-worth, the balance of power in the relationship is disrupted. The reality is that emotionally independent people command respect, including from their own children. When parents seek confirmation, affection, or attention from them, it becomes a burden for the children. Instead of gratitude, a sense of duty arises. Children may distance themselves, show impatience or irritation, and the stronger the need for their love, the less willing they are to give it. As an example, consider the story of Helen, a caring mother who dedicated herself to her children. When they grew up and started their own families, she lived waiting for their calls. In moments of silence, she would pick up the phone herself, sometimes too often reminding them of her longing and desire to see them more often. But instead of bringing them closer, this had the opposite effect. Her calls began to be perceived as an obligation, not as a joyful event. One day, Helen decided to change her tactics. She abandoned the role of the eternally waiting and first calling mother. Instead, she directed her energy towards self-development. She became interested in new hobbies, resumed meetings with friends, and began to actively take care of her own well-being. And then something unexpected happened. The children began to take the initiative in communication more often. They began to be more careful with her time, seeing her as a person with a rich and interesting life. The moral of this story is simple. The less a parent depends on the attention of their children to feel their own worth, the more the children begin to value their presence in their lives. When a mother or father demonstrates the ability to be independent and self-sufficient, the children begin to respect them not out of a sense of duty, but out of genuine admiration for the life that the parent has managed to create for themselves. The fourth important step on the path to restoring respect is establishing clear boundaries and strictly adhering to them. One of the main reasons why children stop respecting their parents is the latter's permissiveness. If parents allow children to be disrespectful in conversation, ignore their opinions, or treat them as if their time and feelings mean nothing, such behavior will continue. And it's not that children are bad people, but that people, especially in the family circle, will always treat others the way they are allowed to. Defining personal boundaries is not about severing relationships with the younger generation or provoking disagreements. It's a conscious and unwavering decision about what behavior is acceptable and what is not. And most importantly, it's about consistently following the established boundaries when they are violated. The story of Robert, a successful entrepreneur who retired after running a company with discipline and confidence all his life, comes to mind. However, when it came to his adult children, he faced serious difficulties. They rudely interrupted him, ignored his concerns, and even criticized his lifestyle. At first, he put up with it, convincing himself that the game wasn't worth the candle. But over time, he realized that every time he remained silent, he tacitly approved of their behavior. And then one day, Robert radically changed his tactics. When his son interrupted him again, he calmly said, "I'll continue speaking when you're ready to listen." When his daughter dismissively dismissed his opinion, he replied with dignity, "You don't have to share my point of view, but I expect you to show me respect." And when they continued to test his patience, he made it clear that if they weren't capable of treating him with basic respect, he didn't intend to spend time with them. And what happened in the end? They began to listen. At first they resisted, but over time they realized that their father was unwavering. They saw that he valued himself enough to demand respectful treatment, and it was precisely because of this that they began to show him due respect. When a family faces a situation where children show disrespect to their parents, it becomes a cause for serious self-reflection. It is important to honestly answer the question, are the parents condoning such an attitude? After all, if parents do not set clear boundaries of what is acceptable, children will not do it for them. And if parents are not ready to defend their interests, no one else will take on this role. One of the key steps to changing the situation is to stop providing help and support to those who do not show gratitude. Paradoxically, it is unconditional generosity that can lead to a loss of respect. Parents often sacrifice their time, energy, and resources, even when it is not appreciated and is taken for granted. However, it is important to understand that by helping those who do not value it, parents do not strengthen love and respect, but only create a consumerist attitude. Children stop seeing parental kindness as something valuable and begin to perceive it as their due. And when parents stop providing support, children feel not gratitude, but resentment. As an example, consider the story of George, a father who was always overly generous to his children. He provided them with financial assistance, dropped everything to help in difficult times, and even changed his plans to suit their needs. However, instead of gratitude, he faced constant complaints and expectations of more. The saddest thing was that when George himself needed help, the children were too busy to provide it. But one day, a turning point occurred in George's life. He realized the need for change and stopped exhausting himself with backbreaking work. He no longer rushed to offer his help until he was asked. The most important change was that he learned to say a firm no when it was necessary for his well-being. At first, his children were dismayed by this turn of events. They could not understand why their father was no longer willing to sacrifice himself for their benefit. However, over time, their attitude underwent a transformation. They began to truly value his time and effort. Suddenly, they realized that his generosity was not an unlimited resource, but a valuable gift, not a given. If you, as a parent, feel that your children are not showing due respect for your time, your efforts, or your kindness, it may be worth taking a step back and rethinking the situation. Ask yourself, are you giving more than you should? And if the answer is yes, what consequences will occur if you slow down a little? After all, when you make it clear to those around you that your generosity depends directly on the manifestation of respect, they begin to treat it accordingly. Another effective way to earn the respect of your children is to demonstrate to them that your life is not limited to their interests alone. Naturally, parents dedicate themselves to raising children, making them the center of their universe. However, over time, this dynamic undergoes changes. If you have put your children's interests above all else for many years, they may begin to see you as someone who no longer has their own hobbies and goals. People who have their own purpose in life, their own interests, and a sense of satisfaction always command respect. If your children see that you depend on them for entertainment, recognition, or finding meaning in life, they may feel overwhelmed. Or even worse, they may begin to see you as someone who does not have their own fulfilling life. Let's talk about Eleanor, a woman whose age was approaching 70 and who experienced the bitterness of losing her beloved husband. After this sad event, she focused all her energy on her children, trying to control their every step, instructing them even when it was not necessary. Eleanor naively believed that in this way she would be able to fill the void left after her husband's departure. However, instead of the expected rapprochement, her actions led to the opposite effect. The children began to avoid meeting with their mother, Phone conversations became shorter, and Eleanor felt more lonely than ever before. But one day, she decided to change her life. She joined a book club to broaden her horizons, began traveling with friends, discovering new places and experiences, and volunteered at a local community center to benefit others. Eleanor stopped seeing her children as the only meaning of her existence. And something amazing happened. The children began to take the initiative in communicating more often. They were driven by curiosity. They wanted to know what their mother was doing. They admired her independence and showed respect. This story prompts reflection. If children aren't showing proper respect, perhaps it's worth questioning whether they see a person with a rich, fulfilling life before them, or someone who's merely waiting for their attention and approval. After all, when children see that a parent doesn't just exist, but lives a full life, their attitude toward them changes dramatically. In conclusion, it's worth emphasizing that genuine respect from children doesn't arise from demands. It blossoms thanks to the example that parents demonstrate in their actions, in their ability to set boundaries, and in their very way of life. If there's a decline in the relationship with children, manifesting in a lack of care, attention, or respect, don't waste energy on angry outbursts. It would be much more effective to reconsider your own behavior strategy. First of all, it's necessary to stop seeking approval from children. Paradoxically, the less a parent needs their recognition, the more willingly the children show it. It's important to remember that personal example is the most convincing argument. Self-worth speaks much louder than any words. You should get rid of emotional dependence on children because the more self-sufficient a parent is, the more respect their presence inspires in their lives. Setting clear boundaries is another important aspect. Those around you, including children, will treat you exactly as you allow them to. You shouldn't show boundless generosity if it isn't met with gratitude. When kindness is taken for granted, it loses its value. Finally, it's necessary to build a fulfilling life outside the sphere of influence of children. People respect those who have their own goals, passions, and sources of joy. If parents manage to implement these principles, an amazing transformation will occur. Children will begin to perceive them in a new way, not as those who crave their attention, but as individuals who deserve respect by the very fact of their existence. And over time, this respect will return to the parents, not by virtue of demands, but as a well-deserved reward for their life stand.